The Happiness Roundtable convenes leadership to advance the happiness movement. Stefano Bartolini, professor at Siena University, Italy, and author of Manifesto for Happiness, talks about the need for a common agenda, the role of a common agenda, and some concepts for a common agenda.
Well, we have to agree upon an agenda. That's a basic point. An agenda for social and economic change. Still, we do not have a common agenda. And I see also differences in the happiness movement. There are people which basically think that an improvement in happiness can come from individual choices, which is partially true. But we also need a big social and economic change. So the basic point is to agree upon an agenda. As you may know, I wrote a book which is called Manifesto for Happiness, which is a policy agenda for improving well-being, basically. The basic idea of the book is that the crisis of happiness in the Western world and also in some developing countries as China and India, where happiness decreased in the past few decades. Well, the problem is the decline of human relationships. The gains in happiness due to economic growth has been more than compensated by the decline of relationships, interpersonal relationships, affective and social relationships. And the reason for the decline of relationship is a mass phenomenon in the West, all over the West, even if it is especially acute in the United States, which is the worst, which is in the worst situation in the West. And the reason for the decline of relationships is in a series of social and economic choices, which can be changed. The core of the policy agenda of my book is to change the way cities are organized. Cities has always been the place where social capital were built. The cities exist for gathering people together, and the social fabric is created in an urban environment in the common spaces, such as squares and streets. And it has always been like this in human history. But then cars came. And this changed entirely the situation because cars invaded the common spaces in the cities, destroying the social fabric. I'm forced, of course, to be very quick on this topic. And we can change the situation, which is especially bad in American cities because suburbs, low density suburbs, which are typical in American cities, are places with very low social connections and very low social capital. And we have a model of working city for improving relationships, which has been especially implemented in Northern Europe. If you go to Copenhagen or Amsterdam, you will see how to rebuild a social fabric in a city. And the basis of the idea is to limit traffic. Private transportation. People should move on public transportation or by bikes, and the city should be filled up with common spaces, especially pedestrian areas, parks, sports centers. All these kind of places have a function of building relationships in a city. So we know what we shouldn't do and what we should do. And then we should change schooling. Schooling is especially focused on cognitive intelligence, and it pays no attention to emotional intelligence, which is fundamental for developing good human relationships. Even also here, we have models of good working schooling, especially again in Northern European countries where participatory schooling prevailed over vertical teaching, which is the model prevailing in most Western countries, as mine, for instance. Then we could change the media, because the media are an enormous factory of spreading materialism, which have very bad effects on people's well-being and relationships. Especially advertising targeting children should be strictly regulated. In my opinion, it should be banned, as it has been done in Sweden and other European countries where advertising targeting kids below 12 is forbidden. And then we should change our way to work, which is an enormous factory of stress and ill-being and human conflicts. The way we work is based on the idea of sticks and carrots. Basically, people have to receive incentives to work in ways that they will not work efficiently. This idea is which is typical from economists. I'm an economist from the University of Siena, and this idea is based on the exclusion of intrinsic motivation from work. But intrinsic motivations are very important in work, so it should be given space to other kinds of incentives and motivations which are not monetary in work. Healthcare is my last point. Morbidity and mortality grow enormously due to unhappiness. Unhappiness and poor relationships are the major source of risks for health. So reducing unhappiness and poor relationships would improve people's health and would decrease healthcare expenditures. We are in a moment, in an historical moment, where realistic proposals for improving human conditions are lacking. Basically, in this moment, the big novelty, the big news is nationalism. And the basic agenda to improve people's quality of life is entrusted to people like Trump or similar nationalists spread across Europe. Their point is really the protection of the community and social capitals. I know it is strange to hear this, but their idea is that the community and social capital should be protected by building walls. Globalization and immigrants are eroding our social cohesion in their view and our societies. So let's get defended by bridging walls. We have to contrast this agenda with a different agenda, an agenda in which the improvement in quality of life is due to humanization. Humanizing society and the economy should be the goal. And if we agree upon an agenda for this, it will have an enormous spread, because there's an enormous demand for an alternative to what the nationalists propose. So I think people is really changing. We are in a historical moment in which an entire political order fell, because the traditional contrast between the center wing and the center left has died all over the world. New movements and new forces, new ideas are spreading, and the first one is nationalism. So let's build an alternative to this. Schooling is a very good starting point, and I'm not sure that we would take a lifetime to change things. If we begin with primary schools, in 5, 7, 8 years, we will have grown a different generation. So time will be much shorter. So I'm convinced that there's an enormous demand in the world for an agenda for humanizing the economy and the society. We just have to provide the supply.
Learn more about the Happiness Roundtable at happinessroundtable.org and hear from other visionaries in the happiness movement.